Hi there, I'm Judy Holland, and welcome to Happy Nest, the podcast where you can hear the latest research and best advice for living well when your kids leave home. Join me as I interview experts and explore how to reinvent yourself during this critical passage. I hope you'll head over to judyhollandauthor.com and check out my new book, Happy Nest, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home. Today, we're going to talk about how to free ourselves from perfectionism. Our guest today did exactly that. She's Elizabeth Lombardo, a psychologist who's on a mission to free people from their inner critic. She's also Shaquille O'Neal's head coach for happiness. If you like what you hear, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, rate, and review the show. It's easy to do on Apple Podcasts, or you can go directly to the podcast section of my website at judyhollandauthor.com. Elizabeth authored a bestseller, Better Than Perfect, 7 Strategies to Crush Your Inner Critic and Create a Life You Love. In her book, she writes about how to ramp up your self-confidence and gain skills you need to flourish. Elizabeth says perfectionists are everywhere. They're often unhappy and unfulfilled. They aim for unattainable goals, and that hurts them physically and psychologically. Fun facts about Elizabeth. She met her husband at a gym where she used to teach kickboxing. She meditates. When she met Michelle Obama, she tripped, but the First Lady saved her from a faceplant. Elizabeth and I have something in common. We both have dreams in which we're heading to a final exam and we haven't read the books. Elizabeth, welcome to the Happiness Podcast. Today I'm excited to talk to you about perfectionism because I know that you are a virtual expert on
that. Well, thanks for having me. I actually realized I wrote a book on happiness and then realized that one of the biggest obstacles that I personally had to my own happiness was perfectionism.
I guess that's where we start often, right? We start at a point like that. Can you define perfectionism for me? What is an all or nothing mindset?
Yeah, so, a lot of times people think of a perfectionist as maybe those people who like to have a neat junk drawer, right? Every pen is neatly aligned and every paperclip is perfectly stacked. But the way that I define perfectionism is really much more global. And it's that what you mentioned before, that all or nothing mentality. Something's perfect or everything else is a failure. There's one right way or everything else is wrong, right? Mm-hmm. There's my way, which is obviously the right way, or everything else is wrong. And this all or nothing, perfect or failure, perfect or forget it mentality is how I define perfectionism.
Perfect. And so I imagine there's a problem with that when we want to launch a project. So what's the price, Elizabeth, of perfectionism? But, what are the benefits? But what's the cost of being a really torqued up perfectionist?
Yeah. And, it's interesting because my name is Elizabeth and I'm a recovering perfectionist. And I knew that there were a lot of what I call prices of perfectionism. The stress, the overwhelm, the constantly judging myself. And of course, we know what goes on in our minds impacts what goes on in the world. So as I'm judging myself, we can't help but judge other people. Perfectionism really prevents us from moving forward. So in my life, I mentioned before I wrote a book on happiness, it took me 2 years to even show it to an editor because I wanted it to be perfect before the editor can see it. And as you know, writing your own books, it takes a long time even once the editor has it. So perfectionism really interferes with our emotional well-being because it causes us a lot of stress. It can interfere with our physical health, whether it's someone who is very stringent on what they eat or the opposite end of the spectrum. I had one cookie and ruined my diet. I might as well have the whole plate, right? That all or nothing mentality. Perfectionism can impact our health in terms of sleep, right? Because you may be exhausted, and as soon as your head hits the pillow, that's when your mind starts racing on all of the things you didn't do right. Perfectionism can really negatively impact our work and our productivity and our creativity. And then, of course, it impacts our relationships because as we're judging ourselves, we're judging our partner, our children, our colleagues, whoever it is.
So the judging thing, the judginess just kind of spreads and it infects everything around you. Oh, boy. So how do you
Yeah, it really does.
how do you get out of your own way, to borrow a phrase from your book? How do you get out of your own way if you have the perfectionist proclivity?
Yeah, and the first thing is to realize that you are in your own way. I think a lot of times as a society we like to blame others. Well, it's if he just emptied the dishwasher the right way, then I wouldn't get frustrated with him, right? But really, we need to own what's going on inside of ourselves. And I mentioned before, I realized that there were some not so great things about perfectionism. However, there are some positive things about perfectionism that I wasn't really willing to give up. I thought my perfectionism was what fueled things like writing the books or, getting my graduate degrees and all of that. And then I started wondering, is there a way to keep the good, striving for excellence, wanting to make a positive impact, having high standards? Is there a way to keep the good, but get rid of all the stress? And actually, that's the concept of better than perfect. It's keeping the good stuff and getting rid of the bad stuff. Because here's the thing, tell a perfectionist something doesn't have to be perfect, and this is what they'll say. I know. Yeah. And this is what they'll think. Yes, it does. Because again, that all or nothing, if I make a mistake, that it's not just a failure in that situation, I'm a failure. And so to get out of our own way, we need to realize, first of all, we are more than our actions. And we need to embrace this concept of being better than perfect. So I don't know, just as a random example, if someone were, doing a podcast and the technology wasn't going so well, we could go into a place of judging ourselves and say, I can't believe this is happening. Or we could be like, okay, better than perfect, and move on.
Yeah, good. And of course, that happened right before we started. And I appreciate that little piece of free therapy for me, because that was bothering me. Technology is, it dogs me. I work on it, though. I face it. I fight it. I hire people to teach me. But it tangles up my ankles sometimes. So,
and you know what's interesting? I've been on stages before in front of a couple hundred, a couple thousand people when my AV doesn't work.
Oh no!
And I just go with it, and I use the phrase better than perfect, and I go with it. And I have literally had people come up. First of all, say how I just went with the flow. But I've had people come up and ask me, did you do that on purpose?
Oh.
Just so that you could, show how you can control your inner critic, which I'm like, thank you for giving me that much credit for thinking that. But no, I wouldn't even think to do that. But really, when things don't go the way that you want, giving yourself that permission to be, this is going to hurt some people out there, to be human, and just to say, you know what? Okay, better than perfect. This isn't how I planned it. This is what happened. How am I going to move on?
Right. No, wonderful. So basically, how do you keep from beating yourself up, which you're addressing now, or feeling like you're falling short? Because I think those of us who are big strivers, or probably, I don't know who is a perfectionist, you know better than I do, but we beat ourselves up and we tell ourselves negative stories, because if you are a perfectionist, don't you inevitably fall short?
Of course. Yeah. Because if it's either 100% or everything else is failure, that means even the 99% isn't good enough. So yeah, I mean, and that's one of the problems with perfectionism is you're constantly judging yourself and others if you don't get the 100% every single time. And here's the thing, rationally, even perfectionists know that that's ridiculous, right? In our minds, we're like, no, I know. But again, in our hearts, in our souls, we feel like, yeah, but it should be perfect every time when I'm doing it.
Right. We're in the same, right. We're just kind of in a groove, and we're kind of stuck there. Well, can you talk? I looked inside your book, Better Than Perfect, and one thing that caught my eye was a discussion of fear versus passion. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so every single thought that we have, every single interaction we have, every single action that we have is fueled by one of two kind of underlying principles. And it's either fear or it's passion. And when I talk about passion, I'm not talking about romantic love, although that may be part of it. But we'll start with fear, because a lot of people can relate to fear. Fear isn't just being afraid of something. Something that's fear-based is focusing on what's wrong. So it could be sadness, anger, helplessness, hopelessness, worthlessness, anxiety, guilt, shame. All of that is in kind of that fear pile. When we're being motivated by fear, we focus on what's wrong. We often feel like a victim of our circumstances, and we feel like things aren't great and there's nothing I can do. It's a very helpless place to be and a very energetically low place to be. When we're in a place of fear, when something happens, we may say, oh, I wish this didn't happen, and then become a victim of it, as opposed to when we're being fueled by passion. And when we're being fueled by passion, we're really focusing not only on what's going well, so that state of gratitude, but also on the kind of the spirit of continuous improvement. So I'm grateful for what's happening now, and how can I make it even better? And when we're in a place of passion, that's when we can be more creative. And I don't mean creative in terms of artwork. I mean creative in terms of solving life's problems. So when we're thrown something, if we go to a state of fear, our brain works differently. We use more of our limbic system, which is that fight or flight, and we can't be very creative. When we're in a state of passion, we're using more of our frontal lobe, which allows us to engage in things like perspective taking, problem solving, executive functioning. And so that allows the passion that not only feels better, but it also allows us to make more positive changes.
Right. No, that's good. We don't want to get caught in that I'm running away from a bear fight or flight response, right?
Yeah.
I hate that when that happens. So what about, let me segue for a minute into failure. What role does failure play in our lives, Elizabeth?
Well, it depends who you're asking. When I was a perfectionist, failure to me was the worst thing that could happen in any, aspect of my life. The better than perfect way of looking at failure is, I was saying, it's not failure, it's data, right? It's not failure, it's information. So when you get an outcome that you don't want, maybe you get an evaluation at work that isn't positive. Maybe you're interacting with a loved one who doesn't react the way that you want them to. Instead of it being failure, we're stuck, I'm a loser, the question is, why did you get that outcome? Right? What were the ingredients that went into that outcome? And how can you use that information either right here and right now to make it different, or in the future to make it different?
Okay, great. So when I look through your book, I see a lot of P's, and especially there were 3 in a row that caught my eye: purpose, passion, and people. That's like a tongue twister. So, but you talk about having 3 P's for well-being. What's with that? What's with the troika of P's here you have here?
So as a clinical psychologist, I've worked, and then before that I was a physical therapist. So I worked with clients for well over 2 decades. And I really came to realize that what success is to society is different than what I would call true success. And true success is, it's not just, having a lot of money or looking a certain way or having a job title, which tends to be how society defines success. True success is something deeper. And that's what those 3 P's are. It's having passion in your life. It's being fueled by positive energy. It's having purpose in our life, having meaning in what we do. And then it's people. We are social beings. And so optimizing our relationships can help us really cultivate this true success. And when I talk about true success, I don't just mean in the workforce. I just mean in life. When we have more passion, when we live from a life of purpose, and when we optimize our people relationships, that's when we can really enjoy true success.
No, that's great. And I'm all about these things and all about passion. The red balloon on the cover of my happiness book is, red is a passion color, and a balloon rises, and that's what we're looking for. So how do we identify passion for those of us who have struggled at times to do that, and corral the motivation to make it happen, to just do it?
Passion is really stunted by stress. So I don't know if any listeners out there have ever experienced stress, but when we're in a really high state of stress, that's when we can't be in a state of passion. So if you think of stress being on a continuum from 0, no stress at all, you just got off the massage table, to 10 out of 10, right? Overwhelmed with stress. Hopefully we don't spend a whole lot of time at 10. We don't spend a whole lot of time at 0 either. But when we're at a 7 out of 10 or higher, it's really hard to be in a place of passion, because that's when we're using our limbic system. That's when we tend to focus on the negative, what's wrong. That's when we tend to personalize other people's behaviors. And we're in this place of negativity. So one of the keys to living a life of passion is what I call get out of the red zone. And also in the red zone is where our inner critic likes to take over. When we're at a low level of stress, we may be able to say things like, I'm a good person. Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I made a mistake. Everyone makes a mistake. I get that. When we're in the red zone, we feel like the complete failure. What's wrong with me? And not only did I mess up this time, but let me remind myself of the 20 other times I messed up. So the key is to really control that inner critic. And the key is to get out of the red zone so that your brain can think more rationally. Now, how do you get out of the red zone? There are different ways for different people. Moving your body, state changes is one way. I have one of those small trampolines in my home office. And my kids, who are now 13 and 15, especially when they were younger, when they were stressed out about always math problems. They get stressed out about math problems, and then you probably experience this. You get stressed out and then you can't do anything, and your mind kind of freezes. So they would come in and they would start bouncing on the trampoline. Their stress level would go down. They'd have some fun bouncing on the trampoline, and then they go back and miraculously their subconscious had been working on the math problem the whole time and they could figure it out. So changing our state by moving our bodies, whether it's jumping on a bed, going for a walk, laughter is a really great thing. Listening to music, those kinds of things to get you out of the red zone so that then you can make that conscious decision, that rational decision. Hey, I don't want to focus on the negative. I want to focus on the positive in my life. And that's when we can move forward with that.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, let's change the letters to C from P. Create, don't compare. I also found that in one chapter in your book, you talk about that. What do you mean create, don't compare? Elizabeth, shouldn't I compare myself to others?
Research shows, I'm going to answer that in a minute. Research shows that the longer people spend on Facebook, the more likely they are to be depressed. Why is that? Because people get on Facebook, a lot of times people get on Facebook and they compare themselves to others. Look at how perfect her life is. Look at how perfect his family is. Look at how beautiful she is. Remember, everyone looks good with a filter. Okay, just remember that. But so people, it's that comparison of they're better than I am and I feel like I'm falling short.
Yep.
And everyone has highs and lows in their life. And of course, something like a social media post with a great filter is going to show exactly what that person wants to show. That is literally and figuratively a snapshot of their life. So comparing to other people and feeling like you fall short is really setting you up to be in a state of fear, to be in a state of stress and not move forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, there's a difference between that and seeing something that someone else is doing and think, ooh, I'd like to be able to do that. And then working towards that in a state of passion.
Right.
So in that case, you're not comparing yourself, they're better than I am. You're saying, that's a neat trip. I'd like to go there too. Let me figure out how we can do that. Or, wow, she looks great in that dress. You know what? I could stand to lose a couple pounds. That's going to motivate me to go to the gym.
Mm-hmm. Kind of
that's a completely different mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's sort of that's just setting your sights and finding mentors from afar. And we need all of that. But that's a different program than that. And also everything people put on social media is airbrushed or it's their very best day. Actually, in our Christmas card every year we always have two sides, and this year the actual real side was the disaster with the 3 dogs getting away and the Dane almost loose. I have a 160-pound Dane, and the other side was the polished side where everybody's hair was in place. But that with 5 people and 3 dogs, that's a challenge. So transcendence. What does transcendence have to do with well-being?
Yeah, if you think of transcendence, it means kind of getting up above everything, the minutia, right? I often say if your biggest stress in life is that you burn dinner, then your problem isn't big enough.
Yeah.
If your biggest stress in life is how can I solve world hunger, then you burning dinner is not going to impact you. So transcend really means to say, look, instead of getting caught into the leaves and the specific trees, look at the force. What's really important? And this has to do with your values. This has to do with what's truly important to you. When we give advice to children, whether it's our children or another child, maybe they're upset because their first love broke up with them. Usually the advice that we give is kind of transcendent, right? Oh, it'll be okay. There'll be other people out there. Maybe they didn't play so well in a game. It was one game. This isn't going to determine your life. We're really good at giving that advice to others, but we often don't transcend and give that same advice to ourselves.
Yeah, that's kind of like in that whole self-compassion school too, maybe.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm picking up, I've interviewed hundreds, probably thousands of psychologists in the last 10, 15 years. So I feel like I just know dribs and drabs. And so everything overlaps, even though that's not my background's literature, not psychology, but that's fascinating. Okay, wrapping up, Elizabeth, tips for people, just skim the cream, in the second half of life. How do we be our best and happiest selves in the second half of life?
Yeah, so the key really is that concept of better than perfect. Because a lot of times, when I'm working with clients in the second half of life, they focus on what they wish was different, my body, my partner. I wish I had stayed in this career, not that. So really kind of accept what's going on. Stop comparing yourself to others or even your old self. And then focus on the 3 Ps. Passion. How can you elicit more positive energy in your life? And one of the greatest ways to do that, I don't even like to say it, but I'm going to say it, is gratitude.
Right.
Just read it, yet another study showing how when we experience gratitude, it literally rewires our brain to be more positive. So just taking some time, especially when we're most suggestible, which is as we're going to bed or when we wake up in the morning, to focus on what am I grateful for? And not just like list out 3 things, like just feel the gratitude. Maybe like I'm so in love with my bed right now. It's taking me like 8 different mattresses and 25 sets of sheets, whatever. But when I wake up, I'm like, oh, this is so good. So it literally doesn't matter what you're grateful for. Focus on the passion, and gratitude is one thing. Purpose. Where are you contributing to a cause greater than yourselves? And that doesn't mean, you have to go volunteer. It doesn't mean you have to give all to yourself. Even smiling at the barista and looking them in the eye and saying thank you when you get your coffee, that helps enhance that passion, that purpose. And then people, how can you optimize your relationships with people? And at this stage, it may be meeting new people, cultivating new friendships. How can you do that in a way that works for you?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, number one, for helping me with all my technical glitches when we first got on and for being patient with me. And thank you so much for such wonderful, brilliant, and energized comments. I think this is great. And I think this is going to serve a lot of people. And that's the goal here, because we all seek a larger purpose, don't we, as humans?
We absolutely do. And with that in mind, I would like to offer a free gift if that's okay to you.
Sure.
You have this inner critic. We all have an inner critic that interferes with us. The prescription to crushing your inner critic. I have a free 21-day program. If people are interested, ElizabethLombardo.com/RX, like prescription RX. It doesn't cost anything, but it really is a way to start to, in 3 minutes or less a day, start to rewire your brain so that this sense of passion and purpose and people can really get stronger in your life.
Wonderful. So, well, I will sign up as soon as we get off this interview. And thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Judy.
I'm signing off, and I'm so glad I caught up with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into my Happiness Podcast, where we explore how to get the best out of the empty nest. I hope you'll subscribe, write a review, and reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Check out my website, judyhollandauthor.com. Have a great day, and remember, make it happen.